Hello, everybody. So today I'm going to talk about density altitude and how it affects the aircraft. So, what is density altitude? Well, density altitude is describing the relationship between how the aircraft feels at what altitude it is based on your starting altitude and how the temperature affects how dense the air is. Now, most of you who have been playing flight sims for a long time know that as the temperature increases, turbine jet aircraft, along with helicopters, become less effective as the temperature rises due to the turbine becoming less effective due to the air density is less, along with there's just less pressure difference that the jet engine can create between the outside air and the exhaust. Now, this is the same thing that's applying with density altitude. The only difference with density altitude is they are really just giving a name to it and a process for telling you how dense the air is based on the temperature of the outside air and your starting altitude. And if you look at the chart, which is on your screen, you will notice that there is a diagonal line marked standard atmospheric pressure. And this line starts at 0 feet at 15 degrees C and travels up and to the left. Now, this line denotes what is known as the standard atmospheric pressure. This is essentially when you're sitting at 0 feet, the aircraft feels like it is sitting at 0 feet and will fly as if it's at 0 feet. And that is at 15 degrees C, 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, as you move left of the standard atmospheric pressure line on the chart, you are entering into a lower density altitude. This is when the air temperature gets colder. You will notice that the aircraft is able to perform better. Usually it has more thrust, or it'll be able to take off with heavier loads than normal conditions or under a hot day. And based on that, obviously going to the right of standard atmospheric pressure, your aircraft is going to experience either less ability to climb, so it's not going to be able to climb as steeply or as fast. It's going to have less thrust available than it usually would at the standard atmospheric pressure. And the aircraft, depending on how power restrictive it is, it may struggle to even just get off the ground, or you may need an even longer runway than usual just to get the aircraft airborne. Now, the numbers along the right side of the chart are denoting the density altitude as how the aircraft feels it is flying. And what you have to line those lines up with is the horizontal lines on the chart starting on the left, which is your pressure altitude, which is where are you at. So as I will demonstrate here in a moment, we're going to be taking off from 3 airfields on Syria. It's going to be Nicoya, Shid, and I'm probably not saying that name right, along with a massive mountain here to the east of Tala. Now, because of that, we know that we're going to be starting at around 0 feet, and the temperature in the scenario is at around 35 degrees C. And if we look at the chart, that means if we're starting at around sea level, our aircraft is going to be experiencing things as if it's already sitting at about 2,000, little over 2,000 feet, and we're starting at sea level. And then when we move to Ruweshid, is that we're going to be jumping up to around 3,000 feet above sea level. So if we go up to 3,000 feet on the left-hand side of the chart and trace that over to 35, we're going to get as if the aircraft is sitting at almost 6,000 feet and flying. And then if we jump up to where the mountain is that we're going to be taking off from, which is at around 6,000 feet, at 35 degrees C, the aircraft is going to feel as if it is flying at 10,000, almost near 10,000 feet. Now, For this scenario, we're going to be flying an Apache with 8 Hellfires and two 19-inch rockets armed with HE rockets with a full load of fuel. And while the Apache is capable of taking off in all of these environments, what I want you to notice is how different each environment is going to feel to the aircraft and what is required just to get the aircraft off the ground in these different kinds of environments. Um, Now, 95 degrees C is quite on the high end, but this can affect lower performance aircraft quite a bit, and it can also affect helicopters quite a bit. The Apache has two engines, which gives it much more of an area to work with than with, say, a Huey, where it has only one engine. It's extremely power limited, even when everything is favoring you. And it's the main reason why helicopters in Vietnam and even in modern day Afghanistan struggled to operate in certain areas, because when the temperature gets to a certain height, the helicopters just can't perform. Even if they could under average conditions, they can't get up to the altitudes or operate in the conditions uh, at those altitudes, because of the heat will start affecting them, along with the fact that they're going to be at higher altitudes. And in terms of the Huey in Vietnam, that was just because it was an aircraft that worked fine uh, in low altitude environments uh, under normal conditions, but you suddenly brought it into a hot, moist climate, and the aircraft's design was not really designed with that in mind, and it performed much worse. They had issues where they could not. They had to reduce fuel load, which reduced range. They could only pick up so many troops and only carry so much. And so, with helicopters, especially, density altitude can make a very big difference in how much you can carry, how far you can go, and what your restrictions are based on where you're starting and where you're expecting to end up. So, if you're expecting to be uh, combating an enemy at, let's say, 4,000 feet, you may not be able to get into a hover outside of ground effect on an extremely hot day with a heavy payload. You may have to just constantly be flying forward just to keep the aircraft airborne, because of your total weight and how the air is affecting the aircraft. So with that, let's demonstrate the different feelings of the aircraft at these different air bases. So we'll start at Nicoya. And for this one, we are starting at pretty much about 300 feet, about at most 300 feet above sea level. So yeah, we're only 378 feet above sea level. So we're going to start lifting. We're just going to watch that torque gauge in the top left. As you can see, we've managed to get into a hover at about 77%. We're going to raise it, bring it up to 95. You can see we're starting to get out of ground effect. Bring it up a little higher. So right now we can tell that we can hover outside of ground effect, very capable at this altitude. So we're just going to accelerate, which will increase translational lift, get lift over the wings that we have, and reduce the torque that's required to keep the aircraft airborne. As you can see, the torque is going down slightly as we accelerate. So we're only at 600 feet of altitude here. Now we're going to jump up to an airfield that starts at 3,000 feet. Alright, so here we are at runway shade. This is one of the new airfields added with the Syria expansion. And we're in parking spot. and our base starting altitude is at 2,803 feet. So now I'm going to bring the torque up just like before. Slowly. So right now we're in ground effect, which is increasing our power. So right now we're at a 5-foot hover at 78%, so a little higher than what we were before. Now we're going to increase. Going to max it to 100%. And as you can see, with anti-torque and with everything else, the rotors are actually slowing down. We're at 98% rotation, and we can't get outside of ground effect. So in order for us to be able to depart the airfield, we're going to have to use transitional lift and essentially accelerate before we can even gain altitude. So here we go. Now that we have translational lift, we're going to climb, get the torque down. We're going to reduce the torque so we can keep the engines alive. There we go. Alright, now we're going to move to the mountain at 6,000 feet. Alright, so we are now located at the mountain to the east of Tala, and we are currently located about 5,700 feet above sea level. So we're just going to slowly raise the collective and increase torque. Once again, lifting at ground effect. 3 feet. Extend. And 3%. Still can't get above 12 feet. And we're at 97% and the rotors are slowing down.
Rotor RPM low.
So right now, we are in a ground effect hover at about 10 feet off the ground, at about 95% torque, 6,000 feet off the deck, 6,000 feet above sea level. And we cannot get any higher without causing the rotors to slow down, causing us to drop, and essentially
Rotor
just
RPM
land
low.
back where we started.
Rotor RPM low. Rotor RPM low.
So right now,
Rotor RPM low.
ground effect is extremely helping us out just to be able to get off the ground right now. We are maxing the engines out at this altitude just to stay airborne in ground effect, which means our only choice here would be to get a running start at it in ground effect or on the ground on a runway, and then pull up once we reach about 40 knots in order to use that translational lift to get us the extra altitude we need in order to clear the area. So we can do it here, but it's going to be very slow. We have a very low rotor RPM too. But as we gain more translational lift, gain more airspeed, rotor RPM is looking better, torque is coming down, we're down at 60 knots, pull back, gain altitude, and now we're out of ground effect. However, knowing what we found out on the ground, there is definitely no way we are going to be able to come to a hover at all outside of ground effect at this altitude on this hot of a day. So if we were to encounter an enemy force up here, we would have to essentially do running attacks because that is the only way we can engage stuff on this day. Got to bring this back in order to keep the engines alive for longer than 30 minutes. So, density altitude. Many of you probably know what it does, but not necessarily how it might affect the aircraft or by how much. So I hope this video helps, and I will see you in the next video.